next fireside chat is the journey to responsible tech. From Thoughtworks, please welcome Marcelo de Santis, Chief Digital Officer, and Dr. Rebecca Parsons, Chief Technology Officer.
Good day, everyone. Hola a todos. Thank you for joining us. I hope you are taking advantage of the last day of the High Tech Spring Leadership Summit. I'm Marcelo de Santis, Chief Digital Officer, Thoughtworks North America, and board member of High Tech. Today, it is my pleasure and privilege to moderate this fireside chat with Dr. Rebecca Parsons, Thoughtworks Chief Technology Officer, to discuss the topic of responsible tech. Rebecca's leadership journey in technology has been amazing and extraordinary. Before joining Thoughtworks in 1999, Rebecca was a researcher and college lecturer in computer science. Then in 2007, Rebecca became Thoughtworks Chief Technology Officer, where she was responsible for driving Thoughtworks' excellence in technology. In addition to technology, Rebecca is a strong advocate for diversity and inclusion in the industry, particularly on increasing the number of women in coding and STEM careers. Rebecca has been on the boards of CodeCheck, Anita Borg, and the Agile Alliance, and is an advisor to Women Who Code. In 2018, Rebecca was recognized with the prestigious Technical Leadership AVI Award presented by Anita Borg organization, celebrating a woman who has led or developed a product, process, or innovation that made a significant impact on business or society. Rebecca has co-authored a number of books, including Domain-Specific Languages, the Thoughtworks Anthology, and my favorite one, Building Evolutionary Architectures. Rebecca, welcome to the High Tech Familia. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you, Marcelo. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Rebecca. So, are we ready to start?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's get this started. So, let me start saying that we at High Tech consider ourselves a family, a familia, and we welcome you, Rebecca, to be part of it. So as a new family member, we would like to get to know you better. So please tell us about yourself. What is your personal journey? How did your passion for technology has developed? And what has been the role of Thoughtworks in this journey?
So I was one of those strange kids who really loved summer school, because what could be better? You have summer and you have school. Because I always loved school. I know, weird, but that was me. I always loved the math, the sciences and mathematics. And I grew up kind of knowing I'm a geek. That's just who I am. I knew from a very young age I wanted to get a PhD, even though I didn't know what it was going to be in. But that just seemed like such a wonderful thing to be able to dive into a discipline and then step back and try to understand the impacts. I saw that even from a very early age. I learned how to program when I was about 13 years old. For those of you who enjoy your computing history, the language was PL1. And I fell in love with it. I just thought, this is the most wonderful thing I could imagine doing. And in fact, when I was still in high school, I thought I was going to be a computational scientist. I wanted to marry science and my passion for science with computing. Through a strange series of circumstances, I ended up going to university when I was younger than normal. And so I ended up going to the local university, Bradley University, in the town where I lived. And there I became very focused on applying computing in business. I lived in Peoria, Illinois, where Caterpillar Tractor Company has its headquarters. And I did what most people refer to today as an internship program. We called it cooperative education, or a co-op program at that time. And so I got a chance to work at Caterpillar, and that for a time really pulled me away from the more science aspects. But I continued. I worked in factory automation. And I've got to tell you, particularly for people who are programming now and you just watch what happens on a screen, writing a program and hitting a button and watching a V16 engine block go where you told it to go, there's nothing like that charge. And I stayed in business computing in various aspects for several years. Started back to graduate school part-time as a master's student, but decided if I was really going to get a PhD, I'd have to go back full-time. So when I was 27 years old, I stopped working and went to Rice University full-time as a PhD student. And at that time, my interest was kind of on the fence between the theory of programming languages and the more pragmatic field of compiler optimization. Because I love theory, but I'd spent too much time in the business world, so it had to make a difference. And ironically, this was starting to pull me back towards the more scientific computing, because that's where many of the applications that really needed compiler optimization were. As you mentioned in your introduction, I spent some time at Los Alamos as a postdoc, and that's where I really got to get back to computational science. I had the opportunity to work with some of the scientists on the Human Genome Project, as well as getting involved in genetic algorithms and evolutionary computation. And by the time I got to Thoughtworks, I was ready to be back in the business world, because I felt strongly technology can make a real difference to business, but also to citizens and society and just individuals. And I wanted to be able to do that more on the front line than I could as a researcher or as an academic. And one of the great things since being at Thoughtworks is the nice thing about a consulting company is you get to work on lots of different problems across lots of different industries, lots of different technologies. So I've kind of been like a kid in a candy store with all of these opportunities to learn more and see what Thoughtworks and what technology can bring to our clients, but also to the broader society.
Excellent, Rebecca. And it's very refreshing and inspiring to see the passion you have for your career. Actually, from the very beginning of your career, you got passion for technology, and it's coming to the point in where you became chief technology officer of a company like Thoughtworks. So very, very interesting and inspiring. So thank you for that. Let's get into your chief technology officer role at Thoughtworks. I know, because I'm part of the organization, that you're continuously evaluating technology trends and their potential impact on business and society. So what are the big trends that you're seeing now, Rebecca? And what are the potential unintended consequences that you are concerned with in regard to these trends?
Well, obviously, one of the big trends is the yet another resurgence of artificial intelligence. I've actually been interested in AI since I was even as an undergraduate. And we've gone through these periods of AI hype, followed by what is euphemistically referred to as the AI winters, when everything just freezes and nothing progresses. And then slowly we start to come back again. I think there are many reasons to think that the AI winter will not be as severe this time, in part just because of the general advances in technology. We have tremendous amounts of data, but we also have a lot more and a lot cheaper memory and compute capacity than we had before. And there are many algorithms that are being used today that theoretically could have been, in the 80s and 90s, could have been solving these problems, but we didn't have the compute capacity. And so there are problems that we know we can solve now that we just couldn't solve before. But unfortunately, the hype is still there. And when we look at AI and in particular machine learning, these systems look at the past. And they look at how were decisions made in the past and try to detect patterns so that they can make decisions in the future. But there are a couple of problems with that. One is, if you had any kind of systemic bias, structural biases, cultural biases that were affecting decisions in the past, that's what those machine learning models are going to pick up. They're going to pick up racism. They're going to pick up redlining. They're going to pick up all of those biases because that is the pattern that is there. One of the things, in fact, that we're looking at the moment is, are there ways that we can train on significantly less data to develop models that are perhaps not as biased? There are also approaches to analyzing data sets to try to uncover those biases. And one thing I want to mention, because very often when people hear the word bias, they sit up straight and oh, you're calling me a racist or you're calling me a misogynist. One of the examples that I like to give around a bias that crept into a machine model helps to dispel that. There was a teaching hospital, and they were trying to develop a model that would assist in decision-making about whether patients should go into the intensive care unit after a particular procedure. And they used two different training models. One was a deep learning neural network. It was very difficult to uncover why it was making the recommendation that it did. But it was actually quite a good model. And the other wasn't quite as good of a model, but it was much easier to tell the decision making. And they realized that if they had been using this model, many asthmatic patients would have died. And it's not like the researchers were prejudiced against people with asthma, but their protocols in the past had always automatically diverted all asthmatic patients into the intensive care unit because of the relationship between the procedure and the consequences of asthma. And therefore, the training set didn't have any asthmatic patients in it. Rather than including them all with the decision put in intensive care, they left them all out. And so the model didn't know anything about asthmatic patients. But if they hadn't been able to interrogate that model, they wouldn't have realized that that data set was biased. Not because the researchers hated people with asthma, but because they didn't understand their data. And it's examples like that that I hope to get people past that initial reaction about bias and say, let's just look objectively. What is in this data set? Where did it come from? What are the pressures that created that data set? So that we can start to develop models that have the potential to not perpetuate any kind of systemic biases from the past, regardless of whether they're biases that we consider bad or biases that we consider good. None of those biases are good. but we need to get past that. One other trend that I think is quite interesting is the developments around augmented reality, virtual reality, and the potential that has to bring people together in new ways, to potentially bridge time and space and interactions. We're here interacting, in a video conference. The level of interaction and human to human feeling that we can get would be very different if we were doing this in a virtual reality setting. And so I think things like that have the potential to bring us together. The concerns about those things, though, is the more immersive an environment is, the more vulnerable in many ways people are to being manipulated by that environment. And so I think we have a lot of work to do in understanding what should be our codes of conduct in the creation of these virtual spaces so that they're safe for individuals, so that they don't expose people to messages and such that they're uncomfortable with.
Thank you, Rebecca. These are really great examples, the ones you just shared, specifically when we think about the future role of technologists, right? I mean, it's not only about building things, but building them right.
Yes.
And defining, in many cases, what right is. We will have that responsibility on our shoulders, right, as technologists. May I ask you a follow-on question on this one? I know you developed within Thoughtworks something called the radar. Tell us about the radar. What the radar is. How does it play with trends that you're looking at in the world around us?
So the technology radar is a collection of approximately 100 different technologies that thought workers across the globe think are interesting, have potential to increase the effectiveness of developers, or techniques that are particularly useful in developing technology. And we also have a section called Hold, which is the things that we really think people shouldn't be doing for particular reasons. It's a very opinionated piece, but we crowdsource it from our delivery teams scattered literally all over the world, and try to help our audience understand, okay, well, here's something new on the horizon that looks pretty interesting, so you might want to think about doing this. Or this technology really is now ready for prime time. It's ready for use in the enterprise. It has these specific advantages. Keep these things in mind. But what we're trying to do is encapsulate the experiences of our 10,000 plus thought workers all over the globe. We work for approximately 300 different clients a year across all kinds of domains. And so we have all kinds of pieces of information that we can collect and put out for public consumption. It is very opinionated, however. I will point that out, and some people call us on that occasionally.
Tell me more about that, Rebecca. What does it mean that this is opinionated? And it's a leading question. You know it is a leading question.
Yes, I know. We have a very particular set of principles, if you will. And in fact, that's one of the things that I've got a little subgroup that's trying to develop, what are kind of the shared principles that we as thought workers use to evaluate technologies. We will tend to prioritize open source over closed source software because we believe in the power of open source. We are very convinced of the value of rapid feedback. And that's feedback not just on things like code quality and does the build pass, but is this delivering the outcome to the customer? So we want to get things out as quickly as possible and build the mechanisms that we can assess how effective it is. We do not believe in some miracle programming language or some miracle process or some miracle framework that is going to solve all the technology problems. That doesn't exist. Different pieces of technology, they have their sweet spot. And if you go too far out of that sweet spot, you're going to get yourself in trouble. One of the things I often tell people is just because you can do it in that particular language or tool or whatever, doesn't mean it's wise to do it. And so we want to understand, what are the boundaries? Where is this tool or language really appropriate? This is what it's designed to do. The Rails framework was a classic example of that. If you had a create, read, update, delete problem, Rails was perfect for that. You could get something up so quickly. It would be very clear where responsibilities were. It would be very easy to maintain. But then people started to push the boundaries and tried to make it do more and more and more and more. And yes, it could. But what you ended up with was something that was very hard to maintain, because you were effectively fighting against the paradigm. And we feel very strongly that you ought to use the right tool for the job. And very often that means you can't use a package, or you can't use a package for all of it. Because there are these things called edge cases. And there's only so much a particular package can anticipate. So it's things like that. And we hold these principles quite strongly, and that's the lens that we use when we discuss particular technologies and when to put something on hold in the radar. Another important principle, there are things that we don't put in our adopt ring, which is you really, really ought to be doing this. Not because we don't think they're ready, but many organizations might not be ready. That it requires a particular level of operational rigor and maturity. And if you don't have that maturity, you shouldn't be doing some of these things. And so very often those things end up in in what we call the trial ring.
Excellent, Rebecca. So looks like technologists, we do not only need to help business and society to define what is right, but also we need to be open to learn and unlearn continuously, right? Because all the things that you're mentioning is pushing us to continue to learn new tricks and new tools and new frameworks. So
Absolutely.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the answer on the radar, which, obviously technology radar is something I love also from Thoughtworks. So let me go to the next question. As you know, at High Tech, we're very proud on driving the diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we support the Hispanic community, right? And specifically contribute to increase the number of women in technology and in the technology industry. So what are your thoughts about the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the technology industry? And what is Thoughtworks doing to accelerate D&I in technology?
Well, first off, I believe that anybody who has passion for technology should be able to feel safe and at home in the technology industry. And I have no reason to believe that men in general are more passionate about technology, or Caucasians are more interested in technology. I think that very often we have this stereotype of the white male, and that's the technologist. And we get subtle messages that say, well, it's just not appropriate for women. It's not appropriate for Hispanics or African Americans. And I fundamentally reject that assertion. As in many things, you get far more variations within a group than you get from the stereotypes that are attached to this group. And one of the things I also recognize is we lose a lot of underrepresented groups in technology simply because they don't feel at home, they don't feel safe. And that's why I also reject this assertion, oh, well, we just have to go back to the high schools and get more people involved in STEM in high schools. Yes, we have to do that too. But the fact is, women in general leave technology at twice the rate that men do. And so it doesn't matter how many girls that are 16 years old, we get excited about it if, when they become 25 years old, they drop out of technology because they don't feel like they have a home. And so we have to address the environment into which women, Hispanics, African Americans, all of these underrepresented groups, we have to address the environment that they come into. And that's why I believe both equity and inclusion are so important in the DEI acronym. Because it's not just, diversity is just the numbers. But if you don't have an inclusive environment, you're not going to be able to take advantage of that diverse perspective because those diverse voices will not be heard. And the importance to technology is that by bringing in these diverse perspectives, you can start to see some of the problems or opportunities that maybe you wouldn't see otherwise. If you have an all-male team designing something, they are not going to look at the problem in the same way a woman is going to. If you have an all-white team, they are not going to be bringing in the perspective of someone who grew up in a Hispanic culture or grew up in an African American culture. They won't bring that perspective. But if you have, your token woman and your token, your token white woman and your token Latina and such, if they can't make their voices heard, you're still not going to hear the perspective. So I think we have to focus on the inclusion so that we can do a better job of solving problems and we can take better advantage of the opportunities that are out there. Thoughtworks has put out something called the Responsible Tech Playbook. And it's a collection of lots of different tools different people have come up with to help tease out those perspectives that perhaps we don't think about. And to try to identify the unintended consequences of some of the technology that we build. Because fundamentally, as a technologist, we're great at solving problems. We've got this laser focus on the problem. And what we need to do is step back a little bit and move the blinders back and say, oh, well, if I thought about this stakeholder group as well, this is the solution that I could come up with. And that's the importance of technology. And Thoughtworks, fortunately, has been committed to diverse perspectives pretty much since the beginning. We put a major push on it over the last several years, and it makes us a better place. We are very proud of the fact that we score quite high on the diversity and inclusion scores on many of our employee engagements, that people really do feel like they can bring their whole true selves to work. They can be who they are and they can represent their perspective, and they are valued for their talents and their experiences.
Thank you, Rebecca. And what important what you said about we leaders in technology having the need to address the environment for all these individuals to be at the best, right? I think that's a great call to action for each and all of us here in the audience and in the technology industry. So we have another, I think, 15 minutes, and we want to get some questions from the audience in a couple of minutes. So let me ask you one final question, Rebecca. What's your advice for people evaluating whether or not to pursue a STEM career?
Well, first off, and apologies for the pronunciation, but we need más Latinas in tech.
That's a perfect Spanish.
We as an industry need to have representation that is far more reflective of society, because we are the ones who are going to be building many of the tools and products that are having an increasing impact on the day-to-day life of people. And if the people who are building those products and who are bringing this technology to market are not reflective of the population that are going to be using those products, then we're not going to be doing a good job of serving the needs of the whole community. And so to me, it is critical that people who have passion for solving problems, people who love to experiment, dabble with technology, people who want to wanted to take apart their toys as kids to see how things worked. One of the things I enjoy the most when I get into discussions with people is I wait to see when their eyes light up, because that's what people are truly passionate about. And my call to all of you is, if your eyes light up when you talk about any aspect of STEM, whether it be programming languages or robotics or artificial intelligence or experience design or product, if that's your passion, you have a home in technology. It might not be the most comfortable fit. It has been more or less comfortable for me over my time in technology, and I got a lot of gray hair to show for how long I've been doing this. But as I said at the beginning, I'm a geek. I cannot imagine doing anything else. And so I would like to encourage all of you who you want to help solve problems, you want to make the world a better place, you want to bring your ideas to life. There is a home for you in technology. You just have to not be afraid to learn. Marcelo, you mentioned that this earlier. Technology is changing at a rapid rate. And so if you're curious, if you love to learn, if you love to experiment, if you love to dabble, technology is a great place for you. Just make sure you are ready to learn and be okay if maybe something doesn't work out the first time. I try to remind people the word experiment means you don't know what the answer is. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the experiment's going to work and you're going to say, great. And sometimes an experiment isn't going to go out the way that you intended, but that's still good because you learned something. You had an assumption that turned out to be false. And so you learned something. So be courageous, be curious, and be passionate. And the last thing I will say is be supportive, but also be willing to ask for help. Because sometimes it is lonely. Find communities where you do feel safe, where you can maybe trial some of your ideas. But that's an important part, is to be there to support others and to ask others for support when you need help.
Thank you, Rebecca. Very, very inspiring. Very inspiring. Thank you very much. I think I will have to pay more attention to those sparkling eyes as I have conversations with my colleagues in the industry. Thank you for that. So let me go to one question from the audience here. I will read it. With the forthcoming immersive environment, in addition to AI bias, what other things we should be paying attention as technology builders?
Well, we want to pay attention to what value the individual participants should be getting out of the interaction in that virtual environment. I mean, when you think about what happens when you're on Facebook or browsing someplace and you've got all of these ads coming up, in general, those ads are not creating value for you. They might even be highly personalized to you, but they aren't there because you want them to be there. They're there because somebody else wants to extract value from you as a result of them being there. And so I think we have to balance and be clear on what should the participants be getting out of this interaction, not what should the sponsors. Certainly, we do have to take their needs into account as well. But the primary focus needs to be on what is the value that's going to be created for the participants. It might just be entertainment. Immersive games have been around for a while. There's nothing wrong with that. But we want to make sure that this doesn't become the environment like in Ready Player One, where basically all you ever see is advertisements. We want to focus on what the interaction is. Another thing, and this is perhaps a bit more disturbing, but we need to make sure that it's easy for people to feel safe and protect themselves. I've already read articles about women who have been in these, in some of these virtual worlds, who felt like they were being stalked and harassed. And so making it easy for people to protect themselves is going to be another important consideration. Just because no physical harm can come to somebody in a virtual world doesn't mean emotional and psychological harm can't. And so we want to make sure that regardless of what the purpose of the world is, that there is a way for people to feel safe. Because as we've seen over the years in with Twitter and all of that, human beings don't always act all that humane when they're in an anonymous online world. And so we want these places to be positive interactions for people, and that is unfortunately going to require us as technologists to think of all the different ways human beings can be not terribly humane.
Great points. Good points, Rebecca. Definitely more responsibility to all of us as technologists and the ones to come, right? The new generation of technology leaders. So let me go to another question here. Completely different topic now. How are we influencing the inclusive environment to retain diverse top talent?
One important thing is to ensure that all the voices are heard, and people aren't talked over. They aren't. They don't have their ideas co-opted. That they truly have a voice and truly have a seat at the table. As I said, it's one thing to get to the table. Okay. Now I'm at least in the room. But if nobody lets me talk, doesn't help. If I give an idea and nobody pays attention to it, and then Larry says exactly the same thing and everybody says, "Oh, great idea, Larry," well, that's not helpful either. And so as leaders, as facilitators, and just as individuals on teams, it's everyone's responsibility, but in particular the leaders and facilitators, to make sure, oh, actually, Anna has been trying to say something for a while. Anna, would you make your point? Trying to draw those voices out, make sure that there's a space for them to be heard. For some people, they need to do more preparation to feel comfortable. And so as we are in positions as coaches or mentors, maybe before a big brainstorming meeting like that, we do a pre-meeting with someone who is new to the team or isn't necessarily as ready to try to put their ideas out there. And okay, let's do a dry run. Take me through some of the ideas that you have, and give people a chance to increase their confidence in their ideas and just as importantly, their ability to express their ideas. I think that's an important part of it. Is we have to make the space, and then finally, again, allow the space for experimentation to occur. One of the things that I find particularly frustrating is that, if you, Marcelo, gave a bad talk, people would not condemn all male speakers. When a woman gives a bad talk, and I actually heard this happen once at a conference, the organizers were talking on stage about how proud they were at how diverse the speaker lineup was. And then a woman gave a not so good talk. It happens. Somebody actually tweeted, "This is what happens when you care about diversity. You get bad speakers." As if no man has ever given a bad talk. I can assure you, many men have given many bad talks. And yes, some women give bad talks too. That doesn't mean that you always get bad speakers if you care about diversity. And so it's pushing back against messages like that and allowing safe spaces for people to experiment. Because sometimes those experiments don't work out. And if we don't have that safe space for anybody to do an experiment, organizations love to take failures and say, out the door. It's much more difficult to do the hard work that says, that was a good experiment, even though it didn't succeed. That was the right idea, versus, that was just a really bad idea. Sometimes there are really bad ideas. And we have to do the hard work of separating those, because experiments, particularly from people who think differently than the established wisdom, you have to take risks to try to make space for those ideas. And anytime you take risks, you run the opportunity of failing. And it's important to make sure that the people who are doing the experimenting, who are bringing the ideas, are celebrated for taking the risk and are given a safe space. And that's something I think all of us need to do.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. I know we only have 3 minutes, but I just want to capture, share with you this question, which I think is important. You made it to the C-level in a field in which women don't have high presence. While making it to the C-level, what did you learn that you wish you known before? Anything that you can share in 1 minute?
Your ability to communicate to people outside of your role is critical. At the C-level, yes, I'm the CTO, but I'm a business leader. I just can't talk technology. I have to be able to talk in the context of our business. Same thing if you're a CFO or anything. the farther up you get in an organization, the more you have to be able to look broadly across what is it that my business is trying to achieve and be able to communicate from the perspective of those business outcomes, not just from your area of expertise. Try not to say from the technology perspective, from the finance perspective. Try instead to focus on from the perspective of our business, this is what I see.
Thank you, Rebecca. So we are unfortunately at the end of our fireside chat. I had a great time. I'm sure all the audience also had a great time. Dr. Rebecca Parsons, thank you for your time, insights, inspiration, and many thanks for your leadership in building a diverse and inclusive technology industry. Thanks also to the audience for the active participation and engagement, for the questions, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the summit. Take care and see you soon. To the future.
Muchas gracias.